Hello, welcome to Some Notes on Style. I'm your host, Joseph. This week we're going to take a look at 10 different shirt collar styles, their details, a little history, some suggestions on how to wear them, and we're also going to look at some of the benefits of selecting a truly unique and characteristic collar style, which can instantly give your dressier looks a certain personal signature. Now, right off the bat, for this episode, I'm partnering with ProperCloth, who very kindly reached out to me offering an opportunity to experience shopping their custom program. So ProperCloth has been around since 2008, initially starting up as a custom shirting company, but since then they have grown to incorporate not only custom shirting, suiting, and trousers, but they also have a pretty extensive ready-to-wear line that focuses on well-made wardrobe classics, which come in a wide variety of fabrics from some very well-known European fabric mills. But with regard to their custom program, they are incredibly impressive in the sheer number of details with which you can have something made not only to your exact measurements, but offer a pretty large variety of styling options and unique details for you to come out with something truly all your own. So I feel like they're a very unique company which can offer a degree of customization that is frankly quite rare, especially with this degree of quality at this price point. And additionally, they've also given me a promo code to share with you guys for 10% off your first purchase. If you enter the code NOTES10 at your checkout, you can follow the link in the description down below, see my curated selection based on some of the examples I'm going to show you guys this week. And so in the context of this week's topic of shirt collars, I thought what better an opportunity is there than to utilize ProperCloth's ability to offer some 40 different shirt collars as a way of talking to you guys about the differences and nuances of collar styles in general. Because to my mind, this is where investing in a custom shirt really gets interesting. Because why would you go through the effort and expense of getting something custom made if you're not going to come out with something truly unique and personal to yourself? I think at one time dabbling in the realm of custom clothing was somewhat expensive for most of us to do, but with companies like ProperCloth offering this very detailed level of available options, this kind of provides a unique moment for most of us to be able to dive headlong into the process, which otherwise can be a little bit overwhelming when you start getting into the nitty-gritty. Now, I'm not even going to go into the fact they offer over 200 different fabric varieties. That might be a topic for another day. Like I said, for now, we're just going to talk mostly about collars, starting with the basics and then dabbling into a few more atypical examples. Now, I don't want to alienate you guys and make this whole video a big old ProperCloth advertisement. Sorry, ProperCloth. I love you guys, but I'm going to go ahead and get into basic collar styles, and then at the back end of the video, I'm going to show you all what I ended up getting from them, what kind of custom options I went with. Also, you might just take a note that as I go through each collar style, I am going to make a reference to the style name ProperCloth refers to and provide some of their measurements as a reference point, but I'm also going to talk about these collar styles generally. So some of the examples I show when referencing these collars are from my own archives, including pieces from Ralph Lauren, Brooks Brothers, H&M, Gucci, and Domenico Vacca. All that being said, let's dive into some collars. Oh, and one more quick reference. The other day I saw a short on Instagram from Sartorial Amsterdam who did a great job talking about the historical evolution of the modern day shirt collar and included some really great imagery illustrating some of his points about how we arrived at today's shirt collar and just how far back its origins go. I got a quick clip running alongside here, but I have in the description down below a link into the video, so you got a spare minute. I'd highly recommend jumping over and checking his video out. There's not much sense in me expanding further on something that he did such a fantastic job on already. So now let's really get into some shirt collar styles. The straight forward point. Okay, so first off, the straight forward point collar is the most classic, iconic, and simple collar that you can find. It's sharp, it's balanced, it has a certain straight-laced edge. It's stylistically neutral, so much so that it is the default military standard on most uniforms. The straightforward point collar does not fuss around with any funny shapes or complex curves. Occasionally we see a longer or shorter version depending on the style of the day. For example, here is a vintage piece from Tom Ford's Gucci days in the late 90s where we see a longer, more pronounced forward point which begins to kick out nearly like a spread. But generally it provides a minimal, clean foundation which sets the stage for the very definition of what a shirt collar is supposed to look like. For that reason, we see that it often can be associated with 1960s NASA engineers or straight-laced 1950s IBM businessmen. Sometimes shows a bit of a resurgence in being stylistically cool, like we see in some recurring characters in Federico Fellini or Quentin Tarantino films, and therefore aligns with a certain type of fashion brand, say like Hedi Schlemon's Dior or Saint Laurent days, or the stark minimalism of Miuccia Prada. Its clean, sharp lines flatter a rounder or wider face shape, providing a bit of a structured contrast, and because of its no-nonsense styling, it appears best with a four-in-hand knot and a slim single-breasted suit. The soft ivy button-down. So, soft ivy button-down collar is an iconically classic American prep collar shape. It first came on the scene in the early 20th century when it was derived from polo players looking to prevent their collars from flapping up in the wind and hitting them in the face as they were riding their horses. So, adding in a bit of a functional element, two small buttons were placed at the tips of the collar with small buttonholes, allowing the collar to be firmly fastened to the chest. So although this is a sporty, somewhat casual style, their inclusion in the world of what was quickly solidifying as modern-day sportswear in the early half of the 20th century, the button-down collar became intertwined with mid-century American prep. So therefore, although it is generally considered to be a casual collar, old school preps and some very stylish early adopter Europeans like Gianni Agnelli incorporated this style into much more formal looks, pairing them not just with blazers and sport coats, but full-on double-breasted suiting and formal neckties. Agnelli notably wearing his with the buttons undone for a uniquely personal sense of sprezzatura. Because of their ubiquitous nature, these collars tend to flatter almost all face shapes, and pair very well with the classic and traditional four-in-hand tie knot. This is the ProperCloth version of a nicely rolled button-down, and this model known as the soft Roma button-down collar. Now, quick note here, pay close attention to that collar roll. All throughout the mid-20aughts, with the advent of online message boards diving heavily into the nuances of what went on to define classic American prep style, the newly minted term OCBD, or Oxford Cloth Button-Down, enthusiasts quickly crafted nerdy rating scales regarding which brand perfected their own takes on the classic iconic Brooks Brothers collar roll. And they're not completely wrong. A good collar roll really does provide a great deal of character and visual interest to a button-down collar. Its soft, fluttering shape draws the eye inward toward the knot of the tie and upward toward the beauty of the human face. If it's worn open, some of the drama crafted by these complex curves can be a wonderful counterpoint against the sharper geometric lines of a tailored jacket. Oftentimes, this subtlety is something that I feel many clothing brands overlook when producing button-down collars by neglecting the finer nuances of button placement and collar length. ProperCloth seems to get a pretty close to perfect version in here. But of course this is all debatable, which brings us to our next collar, which I will call modern button-down. So whether this is a result of negligence or true intent, this style of button-down will be what you probably find most commonly throughout most companies offering a button-down collar. As much as I love their simple modernity, Uniqlo can be guilty of this on their Oxford Cloth Shirts. But when seen through a different light, the modern button-down can be traditional and modern at the same time. By minimizing the roll, many of the same attributes of the traditional forward point collar can be incorporated into this style as well. Because the roll is often flattened out, sometimes to stick straight lines, any sort of flourish quickly becomes reduced down to simple geometry. So for this reason, this is probably the most commonly accepted type of button-down collar. It's generally pretty casual, however similarly to the forward point collar, some fashion brands really dig into its clean, simple, modern line, and if it's pressed out well and done sharply, it can lend itself to a certain type of edge. And because there is very little room for a necktie in the somewhat rigid version, a simple four-in-hand knot will probably be best. It's perhaps a little easier to wear open collar without a necktie, which maybe helps to broaden its appeal. I don't mean to poo-poo the modern button-down, it's certainly a viable option if it suits your taste. Sometimes I just find that the beauty of the more stylized curves of the American Ivy-style button-down have been somewhat stripped away by modern mass production. The English spread collar. So now we're going to get into some more formal territory. The spread collar is on the upper edge of the most formal of collars. It's quite classically a very dressy collar. It was first attributed to the Duke of Windsor wearing his custom-made Savile Row shirts and structured jackets with American-made full-cut trousers. The English spread collar is structured and stiff. It helps to provide a lot of balance for narrower, leaner faces. Because of the length and spread of the collar, it also sits very nicely below a jacket lapel, so there are not any strange geometries happening between the jacket, collar, tie, and neckline, which can sometimes happen if a shirt collar is too short or too narrow. Because of its heavily interfaced structure, it tends to pair very well with fully canvas jackets with sharp lines and padded shoulders, something the English do quite well. And the spread collar flatters a wide variety of face types, giving the best possible outcome for a clean, sharp look. And because of that wide spacing between the tips of the collar, you've got a lot of room for a variety of knots in your necktie. The English spread collar can be worn with a full Windsor knot, a half Windsor knot, or your basic four-in-hand. There's plenty of room for personal interpretation. But the spread collar really seemed to level set the traditions of classic formal wear, so here we're going to dive into how the spread collar and its small proportional variations really opened the gateway for a lot of different interpretations based on the styles of the day, or even regionally interpreted variations, such as the Italian spread collar. So in typical Italian custom after World War II, when more Italian tailors began to merge onto the global scene, they differentiated themselves from the stiff starch appearance of the English by refining some of the subtleties of traditional tailored clothing. With finer, softer materials and lighter weights, with more exaggerated and flared lines possible thanks to their nuanced tailoring techniques, their interpretation of the spread collar just had a touch more character. Individual tailors would work extra hard in trying to achieve just the right type of signature curvature, almost working in a type of S-curve into the roll of that collar. Perhaps much the same way, the American Ivy League button-down collar incorporated softer, fluid lines contrasting the stiff tailoring. The Italians seemed to incorporate this fluidity into something that was equally structured and soft at the same time. Here I'm showing the ProperCloth version of their Roma spread collar. In this instance I had it made up in a washed denim for a shirt which really straddles the line between formal and casual. Ultimately, if this shirt is worn without a tie, I find some of the characteristics of the Italian spread collar can look quite nice, because that signature height and roll provide a lot of visual interest to that neckline. But if it's worn with a necktie, the Italian spread collar tends to look best when paired with a necktie which has a bit of heft, or something like that other Italian signature, which is a true 7-fold necktie, creating a necktie with a lot of body. Cutaway collar. So the cutaway collar really pushes the upper limit of formality. The lines of the collar angle backward toward the shoulders, almost mimicking something along the lines of a formal wingtip collared shirt. This exaggerated line tends to broaden out the neck by pointing out toward the shoulders. Depending on the height of the collar band and the extremes of the spacing between the collar points, then there is generally a great deal of room for the necktie to be given a lot of prominence. Not only do we see the knot free and clear of any competing framework, we also see a lot more of the tie at the collar feeding into the turn down. Here's a shirt I had made up with ProperCloth in a fine white stripe on blue ground in a refined cotton. I feel like this version plays very nicely with some of the most formal circumstances, like here when worn with a 3-piece pinstripe suit, but it can also look great when worn casually open collar with a navy blazer. Similarly to the Italian spread collar, I find this shapely version has some very nice characteristic lines, which make it quite interesting when worn with or without a tie. Band collar. The band collar is quite a unique choice because it can be both informal or somewhat avant-garde or artsy. And some versions of it can take an almost historical style, referencing the old days of detachable shirt collars in which the body of the shirt would be interchanged and washed more frequently than the collar itself. And as the shirt became old and ratty, it would quickly transfer into a weekend work shirt. So in this historical context, the band collar almost has a type of rugged connotation. But on the flip side, it can also allude to an almost Eastern styling, referencing something like the Nehru-style collar, so named after the first Prime Minister of India. The beauty of this collar is that it's so minimal it barely even exists, because in all reality, it's just the collar band and no collar at all. But in keeping with its origins, if it's worn formally, it somewhat alludes to an Indian prince or a priest. This collar almost takes a look of divinity, like some sort of spiritual leader whose collar needs advanced beyond the rest of us mere mortals. But in all reality, for someone that's looking for a type of shirt collar which is distinct and might not be so fond of wearing neckties, the band collar provides a welcome alternative. Club collar. Originally appearing in England's Eton School in the mid-18th century, the club collar originated in the glory days of the detachable collar era. Its stiff and structured shape made way for the perfect symmetry of a balanced curve, eliminating the need for collar points entirely. As detachable collars grew out of favor and attached shirt collars became more common, the unique shape of the club collar provided a distinct point of difference thanks to the growing popularity of the Aero shirt brand, featuring many of them in their advertisements. For this reason, the collar can be most closely associated with 1920s and 30s. Oftentimes, these collars were depicted on very muscular, chiseled faces in the J.C. Leyendecker artwork featured in many of these ads. And rightly so. The contrast of this straight and curved line tends to play quite nicely against a muscular and sinewy face. But because of the specific distinct shape of this collar, it tends to work well with a narrower, tighter four-in-hand necktie so as not to compete with some of the complex curves. Oftentimes we see the club collar alluding to its early detachable days by having it made up in a contrasting white colorway against a striped or solid colored body. And given its elite prep school origins, it can often allude to a highly refined individual, providing a wink and a nod through a very considered detail choice in his shirting. Tab collar. First introduced by the Prince of Wales in the 1920s, the tab collar also works overtime in showcasing the beauty of a tightly tied knot and a well-made necktie. Starting out with the general proportions of a straightforward point collar, the addition of a tab in the center point of the roll creates a unique shape, which jets the tie knot up and forward toward the observer, creating a very pronounced tight presentation. The tab collar can therefore be somewhat restrictive and specific to its usage. And let me tell you from experience, you've really got to develop quite a hand in not only tying a proportionally tight knot to be just the right size, but also dexterous enough while working the tips of your fingers in to button that little button beneath your already tightly tied tie knot without choking yourself. The end result can be uniquely beautiful, but getting there does provide a bit of a challenge, especially on a mannequin. But when paired with a high button waistcoat, a tight v-neck sweater, or a trim double-breasted suit, the tab collar creates a miraculous illusion of proportions. So it tends to flatter gentlemen with long necks, round or square faces because of its inherent verticality. Tab collars are incredibly rare, so although I didn't take the opportunity integrating one into a custom-made ProperCloth shirt, it would be something quite unique and not easily found on the open market. The double or triple stacked spread. Now, this is not one currently offered by ProperCloth. Maybe this is a little bit of a subtle suggestion on my part, but given how rare and odd these collars are, I totally understand it if it's not something they're interested in. I first saw these collars myself in the early 2000s, once again thanks to Tom Ford at Gucci, incorporating moments of double high stack collars throughout the line. Around the same time, when I moved to New York, I came across a very expensive Italian boutique, Domenico Vacca, who showcased their double and triple stack collars in their shop windows. The shirts are prohibitively expensive, but I remember staring in amazement at their exaggerated, glorified beauty. Recently, I came across a handful on eBay at a much more affordable price and seized the opportunity to get my hands on something so ridiculous. I have not seen these collars very frequently ever again. I know they must have existed before that, but I tend to think of them as somewhat of an Italian or European thing, which I'm not entirely familiar with its origins. This lends itself to an extremely tall collar. The end result provides a maximum amount of shape against a tall, thin neck, which is required to get something like this so high up there. But the benefits are you can get a ton of room to work in an incredibly expressive collar roll. Not to mention, when paired with a necktie, extremely exaggerated knots and all kinds of widths and thicknesses can be paired to give a collar experience like no other. Like I said, I'm sure there is some greater amount of historical context for these things. Perhaps this is why one of the most prominent wearers of this type of extreme collar was none other than the man himself, Karl Lagerfeld. I know he had a great deal of his shirts custom made from Charvet of Paris, and many times they were literally detachable collars, which is on a whole nother level. But who else could honestly pull off this look other than an old school Germanic couturier influenced by the late 19th century? But now that I've got a few in my collection, maybe I'll give it a shot myself and see what happens. Okay, so now that we've gone through 10 different varieties of shirt collars, let's take a jump over and take a look at the 4 shirts I had made up from ProperCloth. So first up is that blue button-down collar. The model is the soft Roma button-down collar, which is a little more pronounced than their typical soft Ivy League collar. I was looking for something that would really give me a nice exaggerated roll and not something I could easily pick up from Brooks Brothers off the rack. And as far as fabric, I experimented a little bit, going with their Rita light blue merino wool Royal Oxford. I was quite a bit intrigued to see something that promised to maintain the look of an Oxford in its weave, but provided a much more refined, lighter weight alternative, as opposed to a cheap, heavy-duty cotton Oxford cloth. And I gotta say, I'm surprised. The fabric is indeed very dressy and lightweight. It washes up quite nicely. Word of warning, it does seem to wrinkle very easily, but I guess that's what I get for trying to take such a traditionally hard-wearing sports shirt and make it out of such a nice, refined material. Next up, that spread collar denim shirt. This is cut with a soft Roma cutaway collar because, like I said, I wanted to try to get something very distinctively dressy and formal out of an otherwise quite casual material, like in this instance in an Albiate washed light indigo slub denim. I went back and forth on whether or not to add Western style patch and flap pockets, but ultimately decided to err on the side of going a little bit cleaner to maintain a dressy finish to the denim without muddying up the water too much. I gotta say, I'm quite happy with the results of this thing. It's exactly what I was looking for, this fine balance between a well-constructed, well-proportioned dressy collar and a slightly more rugged material, although being from Albiate, this is by no means some cheap Western wear shirt. Then for a true formal dress shirt, I went with this nicely refined white on blue wrinkle-resistant Super 100 reverse stripe cotton dress shirting cut in a soft presidential cutaway collar. To be honest, I always wanted to add some nice blue stripes and cutaway collars to add to my Ralph Lauren Purple Label collection of Keaton collared shirts, and I put this guy together taking some notes from those shirts. I honestly wanted to see how it would compare in quality and make, and I gotta be honest, I don't see a whole lot of difference between them. The stitching and refinement and make of this shirt is top notch, and the collar details and proportions, they got spot on. I am certain I will get tons of use out of this thing all year long. And finally, I had to push the boundaries of shirting just a touch into the sports shirt territory. I was quite intrigued by this material called the Jackson Fatigue Slub Twill. It seemed quite rough and rugged, but had almost a knit-like texture in its soft brushed hand. Once again, I went with the soft Roma cutaway collar because I just love that hint to formality, but this time around I really went for it and added some safari patch and flap pockets and some brown horn buttons. It's been a little warm to wear this thing in the dead of summer, but I'm really looking forward to wearing it as temperatures start to cool in the fall, perhaps even mixing it up and wearing it open as a shirt jacket during the transitional season. So overall, I gotta say, I'm pretty impressed with these shirts. It's really such a cool opportunity to be able to pick and choose all these details and collars and fabrics. It's a process that is quite a journey and something that is very enjoyable. Not to mention, although I did not utilize their services, they do offer quite a bit of help in the process by offering an in-house stylist to help you make your selections. But I gotta say, the website is incredibly intuitive. Every fabric that you look at has got quite a bit of information, about suggestions for styling, not to mention when you start getting into the specifics of the different collar shapes and detail options, each one comes with very clear explanations, measurements, and guides to help along the way, so I really have to give them high marks for making the entire experience very user-friendly. So with that said, I think that's going to wrap us up for this week, guys. I hope you all enjoyed this deep dive into the range of collar styles. Like I said, these 10 collars I presented are not the end-all be-all by any means, but they're certainly a good framework for which most modern-day collars are derived from, with small variations here or there depending on the brand or what era they're from. Landing on your signature collar style can be a fun game of guess and check. If you have the opportunity to go into a shop with a variety of options available, try them on, decide for yourself, that's a good exercise. But if that's not available, keep a close eye out for retailers that offer a range at different price points or things that go on sale, and just try things out. See what feels right and looks flattering to you. It's not an exact science. A lot of it has to do with your own personal taste and what is most appropriate for how you like to dress every day. Because like I always say, when you find something that makes you feel confident and comfortable in your clothing, then all the rules and guidelines of what collars go with what face shapes, etc. really don't matter at the end of the day. You choose what feels right for you and what you enjoy. And if you've enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you're enjoying the channel, please click that subscribe button if you haven't already. And if you'd like to help support the channel a little further and receive the monthly Sun Notes on Style notebook in your mailbox, which comes with corresponding imagery, tear sheets, and breakdowns of all the looks from each week's episodes, head on over to Patreon. The link is in the description down below. Become a distinguished gentleman and help contribute to support this channel. For those of you who have done so already, and already my distinguished gentlemen patrons, I thank you greatly, as always, and I appreciate your continued support. Once again, the channel is Sun Notes on Style. I'm your host, Joseph. See you again next time, guys. Bye.